What is the deal, Reapers? What is the deal? You know what time it is. We're back at you again with the Reaper Motivational Podcast. And we are today diving into something that I was actually supposed to dive into a lot sooner. Is actually this whole topic came into my head. I want to say this was like Wednesday, right? And it came into my head because I had a conversation right at work with some of the people in my I work at the shipyard, so we have like crews, right? And each crew is tasked to do different things. And I had a conversation with them about a subject that was it basically pertained to the Marine Corps and basically killing people. You know what I mean, basically. And they seemed to be a bit upset, I guess, at the fact that me and one of my other friends from my unit were talking about how we didn't mind the idea of having to kill somebody if we went to war. Which, I mean, a few guys probably made a face like, "What? That doesn't make any sense." But yeah, that's kind of how the conversation went. But that's not the reason why I wanted to have this podcast. The reason why I wanted to have this podcast because there was something during that conversation that I won't say got me angry, but it got me thinking. Well, I guess it did kind of bother me a little bit, but it also got me thinking to where I can probably have a more, constructive and meaningful outlook on that conversation than what I would have got, which would have been virtually nothing, right? And that was there's a strong and very visual disconnect between millennials and 80s babies. Well, I guess it'd be what they call it, Generation X. But there's a disconnect, right? There's a clear disconnect, which there's always gonna be, because youth and the older people have always had a bit of a disconnect, right? But it's interesting because in this era, right, if you just watching the news and just living their everyday life, you notice that the disconnect is very, very strong, and it causes a lot of issues, right? Politics and everything like that. Disconnect is today stronger than ever, and I feel that as though that's because of a lot of different factors that have come into place, and within the last, I'd say about 20, I wouldn't even say 20 years. I'd say with the last about 15 years, that disconnect has been amplified and exacerbated just due to the fact that we are in a totally different era now than we were in 15 years ago, right? And I doubt anybody would disagree with that. If you was 2004 is a total different time than 2019. 100%. There's nobody that's out there that's going to deny that. Which you can say for any era, but I don't think it was totally as different. You go back to 2004, there was flip phones and minutes, and now you have, talking TVs. And that's a big jump within a 10-year gap, But I feel where the disconnect comes in is the social disconnect. And that is, it's shown through a lot of factors. So just to get back into the conversation that I had that made me think about it, right? I got into a conversation again, it was basically about the Marine Corps, things like that. And what had got me upset in the conversation was there was a couple people in the conversation that were taking a stance, oh, he's just a kid. He doesn't understand. He doesn't know what it's like to, be in that life and death situation, which I understood it from some people, not others. And when I say that, I'm saying that to say this, right? If I was to go back in time to when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, I come from a rough environment, a rough household. I grew up a certain way, so when I was 13, 14, and, that age group, whenever an adult would try to talk to me, right, I didn't really want to hear what the fuck they was talking about. Now, the reason being was there's a few different factors that goes into that. But one of the main ones was the fact that I always had this idea that if you did not come from my environment, you can't tell me shit. I used to get, I would just look at people. It's like if I looked at you and I knew you wasn't from the hood or I knew your story, I'd be like, what the suburban ass, get the fuck out of my face. Like, I'm not trying to hear none you talking about, right? And sometimes that carries over when I'm older. I'm not going to lie. But, that disconnect is also based in a lacking of authority, right? And if you're the one thing about millennials, right? A lot of us grew up in single parent households, and a lot of us had grew up where it wasn't the same emphasis on authority that 80s babies had. You know, if you talk to somebody who's a bit older, they'll tell you about the certain things they couldn't do in their houses and things like that. Unless you go down south, you speak to those people that still had those, old qualities and things like that, which I don't think are bad. I think they're actually very good. But for my generation, right, and for a lot of these people, like younger people down out here now that are grew up without fathers and things like that, or grew up without a strong authoritative figure in their life, you notice that we all have a huge problem with authority, right? And I'm no different. Like I said, if you talk to me when I was a teenager and I'm just looking at you, it went for adults kind of general, but I did give a better ear to people who I knew came from my environment. You know, if you were an individual, I go back to when I was in 6th grade, right? And there was a teacher I had called Mr. Jones. And I remember when when 6th grade started, right, he first came up to me, tried to talk to me, kind of blew him off, the fuck out my face, you know what I mean? This is after I moved out of New York. I was like 12. And I'm like, I don't know what the fuck going on in no fucking Connecticut. Y'all not going through nothing that I'm living, right? Y'all don't know what I go through every day, right? So I wasn't paying nobody no mind. And, he came and talked to me. I kind of blew him off. And then right after that, maybe a week or so after, I ended up getting into a fight where I kicked this kid in his face. And could have went a lot worse than it did. I didn't get suspended or even expelled or nothing like that. I just ended up getting Saturday school because a lot of the people involved, people had always, looked out for me a little bit. And he came back after the fact and spoke to me, right? And this conversation stuck with me for a long time, right? And it was this is when I found out. I didn't know that he was actually from like Brooklyn and everything like that, and he had lived in the hood and things like that. And he talked to me. Told me a story. He was like, one of his friends that he grew up with in his neighborhood had got into a fight one day and punched this dude in his face and knocked one of his teeth out, and his tooth went down that dude's throat and killed him, right? And his friend ended up getting like 20 years in prison for killing this dude. And he basically just summed it up by saying you gotta think before you act, because your anger can lead to a lot of other things that you may not really be truthfully ready for. You might not be ready for you accidentally hurting somebody. He kind of took into account what happened. He was like, if you kicked that dude in his face and busted his head open, you could be in jail right now doing a year. And that can ruin the rest of your life. And it made me think, it really got me kind of thinking. Because I actually was taking into account what he was saying, because I knew it came from a genuine place. He wasn't kind of talking down at me. He was talking to me as an individual. Right? But one thing that is, I feel like is the main cause of this disconnect, right, is I feel like the millennials and the 80s babies, the main disconnect is the household. Because I feel, going back into authoritative figures, in the 80s, I'm speaking from a black perspective right now, one thing that black people always knew through all our struggles in American history, whether that be slavery, the civil rights movement, whether that be the drug era in the 80s, the crack epidemic, it doesn't matter if the slave master was on you. It doesn't matter if there was KKK members outside. It didn't matter if there was drug dealers outside. One thing that the black community always knew, that we had each other. We had family, right? Black people, we sometimes tend to tear each other down. One thing that we always knew, that we had a mother, a grandmother. Even when the father was taken out of the equation, we still had that strong sense of family bonding. The Sunday dinners, the Thanksgiving dinners, the big table. If you look at like the Soul Food movie, like that's what we knew we had, even though things was really bad. We always had each other, right? And that's what got us through a lot of those issues. But I think that changed when you got into like the latter aspects of the black community, because for millennials now, you had the crack epidemic, right? Crack epidemic kind of started destroying the black household structure. And then you got the 90s, mass incarceration. So now taking all the fathers out, if they weren't already gone from being killed because of the crack epidemic and everything like that. And now you got all these 80s babies who's now having children And then that's us, right? But now we're coming into a fragmented home, right? And that affected all of us, right? Especially if you lived up in the hood. And if you didn't live in the hood, it affected you too, because you have family members that went through that. So it affected all of us differently. And this is not even just for black people. The household structure has been fragmented a lot, because even in the white community or the Hispanic community, even if you don't live in the hood, marriage was something that people would be married for 30, 40 years. And in the 80s, it was still a thing for people to be married for a long period of time. In today's world, it's not very common for somebody's marriage to make it past 10 years. It's an over 50% divorce rate in America right now. And now you have these households that are totally different. So now you have a whole bunch of, and then it's also a softer generation. You can't beat your kids anymore. You can't do certain things to your kids anymore to instill that discipline in them. So you have a whole generation of millennials and Generation Y babies that have an issue with authority. And again, I'm no different, because one of the things I loved about the military was the fact that it gave me a chance to experience somebody actually like harping on me to be in charge of me. Not saying that my parents didn't do that, but they're not home all the time. There's one one of the hardest lines that Meek said in his album, right? He was like, he was talking to his billionaire homie, and he was like, if your dad dead, or he in jail or something like that, and then your mother is working a night shift, or she's working all the time, who the fuck's gonna babysit? And that's a true statement, because my mom couldn't be there for everything because she's out trying to make it happen. Or my dad was out of my life for a 4 or 5 year period. So in that 4 or 5 year period, and it's not like my mom's always there, and my mom was also young, that authoritative figure was not necessarily always there. So it's kind of, as a child, you have a lot of free range to kind of roam and kind of find things out. Now, I was lucky to the fact that I wasn't a street dweller as a youngin', because I got tired of going outside, because of my temper. Every time I went outside, I got into a fight, which was pissing me off. I was like, man, I'd rather just stay inside and play Xbox. So I avoided some issues. But if I had chose to be outside more, which it started going towards that before I left New York, the reason why I was outside carrying switchblades and box cutters and shit like that when I was like 9-10 years old, because I decided to hang outside because I got tired of staying in the house. If I hadn't chose to be that kind of that homebody, is a whole nother direction my life probably could have took, even after the fact of me moving, and that lack of authority, you don't respect anybody. You don't respect teachers, you don't respect cops, you don't respect anyone. So that turns into a lot of issues. And I feel that's where that disconnect between the millennials and the 80s babies comes from, because make no mistake, even though I do talk about, a lot of older individuals, sometimes it's people who, they have some knowledge, but a lot of times it's just a lot of individuals who's kind of just bullshitting all their life, and now they're 30, they feel like they could talk down to somebody. But there's a lot of gems and knowledge you can learn from people that's older than you. But we have this idea that we don't want to listen to it because they're not coming from our environment. And that's where that disconnect is coming from. I look at some of these individuals and I can't take you saying serious, because you don't understand where I'm coming from. At the very least, even though in the past there was always gonna be a disconnect, because it's always gonna be a disconnect when there's a 20-15 year gap. But the disconnect was never that you didn't even grow up in the same type of household that I did. You didn't experience the same type of pain that I felt, because we had all experienced something, similar up until this point. But there's a total disconnect, and it's really hard to gauge. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this so bad was because when you look at these disconnects that we have with adults and with not adults, with people that are older than us, and with the youth, it's very important for us to be on the same page, because at the end of the day, an 18-year-old can vote. Point blank, period. 18-year-old can vote, and so can a 50-year-old. So we're not meeting in the middle. I feel a lot of these, the liberal, conservative issues is coming from this disconnect, because you can't really gauge like what's going on, because We just coming from two different atmospheres, right? And this, a lot of times, thankfully from this conversation that I had at work, I decided to come and have a podcast about it to be constructive. But the old me, right, 3, 4, 5 years ago, probably would have cursed somebody the fuck out. The fuck out of my face, bro. Y'all suburban ass niggas don't know what the fuck y'all talking about. I'm not ready. I'm not what? The fuck y'all was 8 years old getting fucking warm glass of milk and cookies in your little PJs and getting tucked in by your moms and shit like that. I was sleeping on the fucking floor. Had rats running through my fucking apartment, tearing up the floorboards. Dope fiends down. I don't know what the fuck going on, man. But that's the reaction that a lot of us are gonna have, because there's a anger, because it's the misunderstanding. Now I didn't do that. Like I said, I decided to have something more constructive out of that. But I'm trying to get to the root of it and try to see if I can help mitigate that a little bit. Because there's also, outside of this household, you got social media. It's crazy? You think about it, right? And one thing about social media that I don't like is that social media has effectively taken away free thought from us as people. And you hear me talk about free thought a lot if you listen to some of my motivational stuff. But free thought is super important. And free thought is basically, that's where you have just unwavering belief in what you believe in. And you can't just be easily moved off of your morals and your values. And the thing about free thought is that, the thing about social media is that we all are now into this age where everybody's opinion can infiltrate our psyche at all times. And even if it's not directly around us, everybody has the opportunity to put their beliefs onto you. For example, a good example is, right, you look at just with fashion, right? When I was in high school, I used to wear Champion because Champion was cheap. We ain't had that much bread. So Champion was a cheap way of getting some nice clothes, or some decent clothes. And I used to get joked on for it. You know what I mean? That's just what happened. Social media came along, and through a couple promotional pushes and things like that, them merging with Timberland and all that stuff, all of a sudden Champions fly. To give you an idea, I just got out of high school not too long ago. Well, not just got out of high school, but like I was in high school in 2016. So it's not like it was a 10-year gap to where it wasn't popping and now it's popping. Like, no, this is just what was that, last year? It was like a 3-year gap, 2.5-year gap. You wasn't, 2015, 2016, you wasn't wearing no Champion thing, you was fly. You wasn't going to no clubs, no parties, no, no girl's house and no Champion thinking that you was fly. It just wasn't happening, but now it is. But that's all through social media. The crazy thing is, if you go back into like the early ages, right, it was never a point in time where you had to wear designer to be fly. There was never a point in time. You can legit take a white tee, some pants, and design it yourself with spray paint, all types of shit, and just have your own style to you, and people would say, oh, you dress pretty nicely, as long as it looks presentable. But people you can't do that nowadays. People will say something. They're gonna make you seem as though you look crazy. It's an emphasis on designer clothes now, because on social media everybody got Balenciagas. Listen, there's no way on earth everybody thinks Balenciaga's shoes look nice. There's no way on earth, but everybody, listen, you could wear them shits, it could look crazy, and motherfuckers like, well, at least it's Balenciaga. I've heard people say that. At least it's this, at least it's that. I've worn some nonsense, but people have been like, well, at least it's Polo. That's fucking designer. And now don't get me wrong, like, go back in the 90s and shit like that, people like used to love designer stuff, but it wasn't to the fact that if you didn't have some designer shit that you wasn't fly. You could still be fly. But it's like social media has changed a lot of things, and it's infiltrated our psyche. Just the love for materialistic things. Every Black Friday, you see motherfuckers acting a damn fool, acting stupid. People getting like, now, don't get me wrong, in the Black community, there's always been a over love for materialistic things, and that directly correlates with the denigration and the almost just disregarding of the black male and the black woman in America, and us taking the materialistic love that we have to giving ourselves value because we feel as though the world in general doesn't value us. But it's not just in the black community. We all are fucking slaves of brands, and that a lot of that comes from social media, and that's why I think a lot of this disconnect comes from with between the '80s babies and the millennials, because there was no social media 20 years ago. We not gonna go back into like the night you go back into 2000 2003. Wasn't no social media. I think MySpace just started popping. I want to say like first I heard about it was like 2006, but like maybe 04, 03 it just started getting out there. But social media wasn't that big of a thing. Not every single person had a social media. If you go out, you'd be hard pressed to find. If you talk to 20 people, at the very least, 18 of them got something. They might not be on every social media platform. They got something. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody that didn't. So it wasn't like that in 2003, 2002. So, and that's where these people grew up in. And so they didn't have the same type of effect on their free thought as we do. Now, I think they had the effect on free thought from generational understanding, to where, you know, your family has been tradition to think like this, so you probably thought like that. But I'd rather take a traditional outlook on life than an outlook of you being controlled by companies and people trying to make money. Because at least a traditional outlook on life is coming from the heart. Ain't nothing coming from the heart with these motherfuckers pushing certain things that they're pushing. You know, a lot of these things that these companies and these people are pushing, it's all based on money. One thing Boosie said that I liked a lot, if you looked at the Boosie interview he did with DJ Vlad, he was like, these companies don't give a fuck about gay people. They just trying to make some money off them. It's a fact. Listen, if you are a homosexual individual out there and you think these motherfuckers give a damn about the fact that you like waving around your rainbow flag, you wrong. They trying to make some bread. They know that you're going to buy their product because you support them. So that's why they going to put this shit in the movies and shit. Like, they don't give a fuck about y'all. But that's why they pushing this. That's it. All these companies are driving off of money. I take a traditional thought over somebody trying to make money any day. Period. Ain't nothing you can tell me different. And that's a part of this disconnect. So when these individuals take a look at these people and they say things like, I don't understand why these young people are killing each other so much, right? I don't understand why Chicago has 700 murders, why Philly got 700 murders, why Baltimore got all these murders. That's because there's a disconnect. We coming from different households. One thing that saved me as a youth was that I at least knew, even no matter how bad life got, even though there wasn't that big of a family structure there, I knew somebody at the very least loved me. I knew there was a few people out there that genuinely loved and cared about me, right? But if you take that same atmosphere, that same lifestyle, you give it to an individual and they don't have that type of love in their life, they don't give a fuck about nothing. I personally feel, even though I knew people loved me, I didn't value my life that much. I didn't think my life held much value because it didn't seem like that just looking around me. It didn't seem like that. How does my life have value? No young black man's life has value. That's how I'm looking at it. So if I don't think my life got value and it's somebody who looks just like me, I don't think your life got value either. So me carrying knives, me trying to stab people for stealing my hat when I was in school and shit like that, me doing these things, me kicking people in their face, I don't value your life as much as I don't value mine. I don't give a fuck. But I wasn't that bad to where I'm just out there just wilding out. It's just when the situation arose that I had to get into a conflict, that's when I don't care. But then you got these individuals who are looking for conflict because they hurt. Because I gotta tell you, if you coming from a broken household or a hectic household, it feels good to punch somebody in their shit. Honestly, if you're going through it at home and you stressed out and you mad, don't nothing make you feel better than punching somebody in their shit. It gets all your pain out. I can't do nothing about what's going on at home, but If you talk to me crazy, I could punch you in your face and make me feel better. And I get respect on top of that. So it's a win-win. Especially if you value that. And again, if you're on social media, you're going to value that. You're going to value respect. You're going to value people being scared of you. Because that's what's been pushed. That's what's being pushed. So to come from that aspect, right? That's the reason why but if you're from an era where family was still important and everybody knew somebody loved them, if you were vicious back in the 80s and 90s, you were vicious because that's what warranted for survival. It's not solely based on survival anymore. They killing niggas for social media posts. Because somebody said something you didn't like on Facebook, you came and shot them in their face. That's what it is now. It wasn't the same. It's not about survival. Somebody fucking your baby moms came and shot the car with both of them in there. You didn't even think that maybe these motherfuckers had a kid in the car or something. You just shot the whip. They fucking your baby moms. You tight. That's not based on survival. This is based on nonsense. But again, if you coming from a household where you ain't never had a mother that loved you, and your father wasn't there, and your siblings is wilding out, and there's a girl that you love, and you had a baby with her, you think she love you, and then she start fucking another dude, it hurt to the point where you like, you know what, fuck it. I don't care about my life. I don't care about your life. I'm gonna spray this car up. But that's where that mentality's coming from. Is that it's the different households. There's a difference in households. And I feel it's super important for people to understand this because we need to come to a middle ground. Because Pac said it best. They say ain't no hope for the youth, but the truth is ain't no hope for the future. This is important because we don't get this shit right now. When our kids come up, this disconnect is still going to be there. Now, it'll be more understanding, but this is shaping the world that they're going to come up in. So this is super important. You know, and I'm hoping that none of this is coming across as preachy, because I'm not really shooting for that like preachy outlook, but it's more so just me recognizing the fact that there's such a big disconnect, and it's coming from a place that's just a misunderstanding. You know, me having that conversation with them people last Wednesday in my crew, I always felt there was a issue between the young and the older people, but I could never pinpoint where it was coming from. But that conversation just hit real different because it made me think. It was like, yo, I understand. I see why they're not understanding what I'm coming from. Because the fact, like, one of the things that one of the people had said, they was like, you know, you're taking a life. This is a whole life. And I'm like, yo, life is cheap where I'm from. You from a whole nother life is cheap. People dying. They losing their life. These fucking cops is dropping people in front of their families. In front of their kids. Little girls are getting shot in drive-by. Yo, life is cheap. So it's like, for you not to understand it, the only thing to me that it almost makes sense is the fact that it's just a disconnect. But they need to understand that as well as we need to understand it. Because, yo, these same people that you disregard because they're young, they gotta vote. They gotta vote too. They're 18. These are adults. Their opinion's important too. And we need to also take heed of this because, again, it can't just be fuck authority anymore. It can't just be that. We need to start to instill authority. Because let me tell y'all something, man. I feel like if it wasn't for Mr. Jones that day pulling me aside and talking to me, I probably wouldn't be here. What that conversation did for me, it made it to where before I did some dumb shit, I at least thought about it. I was still getting into trouble. You know what I'm saying? I was still getting into shit. I was still wilding out. But it made it to where I at least thought about it before I did something. If I was going to do something really dumb, at the very least, I sat and thought, man, this could end up pretty bad. And that's where that change came. You know, but hopefully, man, this talk kind of got y'all mind thinking a little bit. You know, this is something that I was thinking about for a while. I wanted to wait until I wasn't so, I guess, passionate about it before I spoke on it, because I wanted to actually be able to convey my thoughts in a proper way. Hopefully I did that. But this is Devontae, it's Reaper Training. I'll catch y'all next time, man. We don't chase dreams, we hunt goals. Let's get it.